Okay, so welcome back, everybody. Again, Rabbi Jay apologizes he can't be here tonight, but there's a march for Israel in Toronto today, so he's participating in that. I guess some other people from Toronto. So class will be recorded. And today's the last class before Shavuot. So we're going to finish our mini series about Mamad Har Sinai, which is part of Sefer Shemot. And remember, the title has been about complaining. So the topic today is from complaint to prayer. And I'll try to leave this with more of a happy ending. Where's my title? Here we go. Here's our source sheet. I think we're sharing. Okay, this is class 15 in Sefer Shemot. Complaints to Covenants part 4. And today's complaints to prayer. And what I want to show you today is that we've been focusing on the need for fear for the buy-in. Last week we talked about the failure of fear. That's the fear, how the fear led to failure, and which happens quite often. And if there isn't an educational follow-up, if you don't have Ava after Yira, sometimes it's not going to last. There definitely won't be a good relationship. What I want to show you today is how the people for sure are complaining, but you can upgrade complaining when you have a deeper understanding of the covenant. Complaint can be upgraded to arguing, which can be what I like to say. I can argue that to argue might actually mean to pray. Like one form of prayer is arguing when you're not saying God's wrong, I'm right, but rather arguing your case in front of God that it's worthwhile for God to do something about a relationship or for God to change his mind, kibiyachol. Okay, now, before we start today, what I want to do is again, the goal of today's share is to understand how we go from complaining at Har Sinai to Moshe Rabbeinu sort of arguing with God about this whole relationship, and especially the strict nature of the relationship, how that's going to lead to the second covenant or the second Luchot, which is going to build a whole new relationship, which enables, which sort of is going to solve the problem caused by fear. That's what I want to suggest, and I'll try to explain that in today's share, which will lead us to Shavuot and then maybe a deeper understanding of Har Sinai. Now, the background to the shir is I want to sort of find myself a heter or a reason why I'm sort of so down on Am Yisrael's behavior in the desert. I've been pointing out that we keep on complaining and complaining. What I want to use is a Perek in Tehillim, which I think is the background to our study, of what David HaMelech in Sefer Tehillim, actually this is his Talmud, his composer, Asaf, in this Mizmor, but from the time of King David, what he learned from Sefer Shemot, and later we'll see from Sefer Bamidbar, what was the message? Why is Chumash putting such an emphasis on all the complaints? So basically, David HaMelech is going to say, we need to study how Chumash tells us about the Jewish people complaining, because from their failure, I can learn how we can find similar opportunities and not fail. So let's just read the first couple of Psukim of Tehillim 78. Maskil Asaf, again, Asaf was the chief Levite appointed by King David when he brought the Aron to Yerushalayim, and that's when the book of Tehillim begins. And of course, he's sort of plagiarizing from Shirat Hazinu, which is basically don't blame God when things go wrong. Blame yourselves. That's the theme of Shirat Hazinu, to remind us to history. Therefore, he's sort of using the same wording, Hazinu amit torati, hatuas nechem limrefi. So he's using wording from Shirat Hazinu to give rebuke. So listen to what I'm saying, my people. It's the introductory lines. I'm going to say in a poetic way, I'm going to make my message about things asher shamanu v'neidaim, things that we heard, we'll see from our parents, and we know them. Okay? We learn from our parents the stories of the Torah, the stories of Chumash, and we'll see in a minute, we have to teach this to our children. We can't hide from our children what our parents told us. And here's the key line, the Dor Acharon, which means to the next generation, B'saprim tilot Hashem, every generation has to receive from their parents and teach their children all the great glories of God and all the miracles and great things that he did, which we learned from Chumash. We probably mentioned this in our study of Haggadah sometime or other. This Mizmor is the background pretty much to Leila Seder and why we tell the story and pass it down to our children. Now, what did God do? Vayakom edut Yaakov, he established teachings, either laws and warnings, to the nation of Am Yisrael called Yaakov. The Torah Sambi Yisrael, again, Yaakov Yisrael goes from Har Sinai. Remember, Kol Tamar Lebeit Yaakov et Tegid Bnei Yisrael. So he gave teaching and instructions to the Jewish people. Asher Tzivat, that he commanded our ancestors, Lodim, to teach their children. and we're part of that tradition. Now, why? L'man yidu dor acharon banim yivaledu, so that the next generation would know the children born to the previous generation. Yakumo, they'll get up, v'yisapru them, and they will tell to their children. That's basically the tradition. What's the goal of this education of study of Torah from one generation to the next? Hopefully, through the study of Torah, v'yasimu be'elohim kislam, they'll put their faith and their confidence in God. V'lo yishkechu ma'aleleo, they won't forget how God is behind historical events and how God's watching our history, and that will lead them umitzvotav insaru. That will lead them to be committed to keep His commandments, not only out of fear, but again out of commitment. And here's the big line: V'lo yiyu kavotam dor soreh umareh. We shouldn't be like our ancestors, the generation came out of Egypt, a rebellious generation, the rebellious and stubborn. Remember, they were Am Sharaf, as we'll see today. Dor lo hichin libo v'lo nemna et el rucho. A generation that could have been redeemed, they weren't ready for redemption. So I tried to explain how the fear was necessary to try to convince them to make that commitment, but they weren't ready to turn that fear into commitment, into love. And therefore, that generation, their heart was not ready. Notice, Hachanat Halev. Remember last week how we ended when Moshe speaks in Sefer Dvarim, which is repeated laws he gave at Har Sinai, right after Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which is remembering Hashem who made this covenant with Har Sinai. He's the one and only God. The first mitzvah is V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, with your whole heart. Remember, we have to go from fear to love with your heart. So Dor lo echin libo, that generation, their hearts were not ready. They weren't able to fulfill that commitment out of love, and they weren't steadfast at el rucho. They didn't support God, as we'll see, and with that generation, God get everything for them. They couldn't stay with their commitment. Then I skipped some psukim, which I'm not going to read the whole parak, but just some examples that we talked about specifically. He split the sea for them. Remember, they thought they were about to die, that near-death experience at Kriyat Yamsuf, and he saved them at Yamsuf and brought them through the water. That miracle, and then he led them with the Anan, Yomam, Belayla. That's the whole Kriyat Yamsuf story. Then Yivakat Surim Bamidbar. He split the rocks in the wilderness and gave us water. That was the Refidim story. Yotzin Dezlim Misela, he took water out of the rock, and it flew like a river of water. That's the Nachal coming down from the mountain.
Which Tehillim is this?
This is, I'm sorry, Tehillim 78.
Thank you.
Tehillim 78, Peichet. It's a very harsh one, the header, but it's a very important one. By the way, I'm pretty sure it's the middle. It's the middle of the book of Tehillim. You'll check with Dr. Gesundheit. If I'm not mistaken, either in words or sentences or something, it's the middle of Sefer Tehillim. Does it add up right? What's 78 times 2?
He taught us that last week or 2 weeks ago.
Oh, good. Baruch Shekivanti. Okay, I probably heard it from him a couple of years
ago. The Tehillim. It is the Sefer of Tehillim, and it's the second longest in all of Sefer Tehillim.
Yes.
It's Sefer, yeah. It's Sefer Sheni.
It's not the end of the
said by Psukim.
It's Sefer Shlishi. It's Sefer Shlishi.
Yeah.
He said that by Psukim, this is the middle with the central pasuk being V'hurachum Yichaber.
Yeah, we're going to get to that soon. Exactly. Yeah, I got to check that out. I got to put that through a computer and see if it really works out. But it sounds like too good to be true. So that's pretty amazing to make that the middle of pasuk. That's
what he taught us, and I think that he used a computer.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, he's good. I'll double check with him, but that's pretty. It's pretty neat. Now, so listen, you have got the same thing. They continued to sin v'yosipo lachto because their commitment wasn't complete, as we saw. They went against Elyon, referring to God, in the desert. And then by Nasu'u, they tested God. Remember, God was testing them. They were testing God. Okay. They're asking for food. Remember, the question, could God give us food in the desert? They should have done the Kal V'chomer. If God can split the rock, and give water, he can give them food. He goes on and on. And therefore, God heard and got angry. And he punished them through the desert. Why again? In Pasuk Chabet, Ki lo aminu be'Elohim v'lo bitchu b'shuato. They didn't put their trust in God again. And then he brought, he brought the Slav, and he brought the man. That was already the story in Sefer Parsha Balotcha. He goes on and on, but basically, Pasuk Lamed Bet, despite all this, they continued to sin, right? And the miracles God did just simply didn't lead to their support. And that whole generation had to die in the desert, 40 years in the desert. And every time he would punish them, they went back and they remembered God and they went back and they said they were doing tshuva. And then they basically didn't keep up to their word. Now, then we have summarize. V'libam lo nachonimo. Their hearts, again, that avat halev was not steadfast with them, wasn't established, and therefore they were not committed properly and a trustworthy partner or faithful to that covenant. But why did God leave us anyhow? And that's the important pasuk, which is what I have davening. God was willing to be forgiving, didn't totally destroy us, even though he could have, and he very much held back his anger and didn't kindle all of his anger against us because he remembers we're only human, we're only basar. We come, we go. We're just humans. We're just mortals. And then he goes on for another like 30, 40, some 30, 40 psukim. How much we made God, how much we annoyed God in the desert, and we rebelled against him during that whole generation that came out of Egypt. Right? So I'm just using this parak to explain why I'm making such a big deal about how the first generation failed, because when we look at history and we see the hand of God in history and appreciate God, when our commitment to God is out of fear, that might be important to make that original commitment. But if I can't take that fear to Ahava, it's not going to work. And therefore, we can learn from studying Chumash how we have to, be committed, and that fear is important, but that fear has to lead through education to love. Now, I want to flip that around now today and show you how God also is going to change and be more forgiving, and that's going to enable the commitment, the brit at Har Sinai to last. Sort of want to sort of summarize the end. If I want to hope what I'm saying is okay. Chet ego is bound to happen. Just like we had that flood story where first God created, and then he regrets his creation and recreates. It's called, the way Chazal say it, God wanted to create b'midat hadin, with justice and exacting judgment. He saw that his creation would not stand that type of relationship. Therefore, he included Midat HaRachamim, which sounds like a drasha on Perek Aleph and Perek Bet and Breshit, which I think is really a drasha on the story of Chet HaEgel and Mamad Har Sinai, because I need to start with Midat Hadin, with the first luchot, as we'll see. They're full of judgment and very strict. But ultimately, I think God realized we would need Midat HaRachamim, and if it wasn't, that sin would have been a different sin. Ultimately, we would need to get to the second luchot because that's going to create a lasting relationship. But I need to begin with the first tablets to appreciate the depth and the beauty of the second tablets. And therefore, a whole new relationship. The second, my whole relationship is built on judgment, on midat hadin. Then I need fear to begin it. But the danger of that fear, remember the fear of danger, or the danger of that fear, is that the relationship isn't complete and people don't stay steadfast. If God's relationship becomes one of compassion and caring and forgiveness, then it makes sense that hopefully might lead to our appreciation of God and being more committed through love. As Chazal say, Mahurachum, Bapatarachum, and that's why that pasuk Vurachum Mechaperavon is not just a praise of God, but reminds us how we need to behave as well to be worthy of God's attributes of mercy.
Why can't we look at it the other way around and say, and I would say that, like, even, if the people of Israel were young, out of slavery, start with Ahava. So he took them out of Egypt. He gave them all these things, and then when they kind of sinned, he came with the din. I could look at it the other way around.
Okay, yeah. Now I could agree with you if we cooked our own mess. Got it? We got stuck in Egypt, and he saved us out of love. But when you follow Chumash, he put us into Egypt, remember, to take us out? He wanted us to go through that suffering in Egypt to begin with. So he redeemed us because he promised to redeem us, but he promised also to make us, remember, Vavdu V'Niltam, he wanted us to go through some level of suffering to redeem us. Now, again, you could have questions whether if God did the right thing or wrong thing, whether it worked or not. But in general...
Very annoying. It's a very annoying thing.
Okay, I'd like to say, write a letter to the editor. In a nice way. Not saying you could always say God could have done it differently, and that's the only book that deals with a question. That's Eov, and his answer is basically that's life. So you can't begin to understand the ways of God. I'm saying now that it happened this way, I'm trying to appreciate it. I'm trying to show you, I want to appreciate why God begins with this strict relationship and the depth of why it had to change. The first luchot we're bound to break, and I need the second relationship built on Midat Rachamim. But I can't appreciate Midat Rachamim, the second luchot, and the final relationship, the ultimate, if I don't begin with the strictness in the beginning. But remember, we start with Tehillim, Reshit Chochmah Yirat Hashem. Remember in
Like,
Tehillim Aleph?
like
think that
think
says it
like
all.
they ask, why celebrate Pesach, God taking us out of Egypt, when God is the one who put us there in the
Put us
first
in.
place?
Yeah. And my whole point is we're thanking God for putting us through basic training. We appreciate the fact that He put us through that experience because we love we love our responsibility as a nation to represent God. If you love the purpose of your job, you can appreciate why you had to go through that training to appreciate it. Now, so just a quick reminder, I'm sure we've done this many times. In the Ten Commandments, it's not just statements, it's not just commandments, it's also a relationship and what's called, it has potential punishment and reward. So it says again, I'm the God who took you out of Egypt, etc. You can't have any other gods. And if you follow another God, be careful. Why? Because God is a zealous God. He's an Elkanah. He punishes sin to who? The Sonai, to those who hate him. But he does chesed for those who love him and keep his mitzvot. And then later God says, don't carry my name in vain, because God won't clean away that sin of carrying God's name in vain. Remember, those were God's strict attributes in the first luchot. Now, as we all know, and then God, if we continue those attributes, after Parshat Mishpatim, and God told Moshe Rabbeinu, tell the people, I'm going to send a malach to lead you, to bring you to the promised land, but you better listen to him and don't rebel against him, right? Ki lo yisal peshechem, this malach whose my name is with him, who's going to lead you, he won't be able to tolerate any of your sins. And therefore, if you need God's help, you have to follow all of his laws. If you don't, he won't be able to carry away that sin and he'll have to punish you. But if you do follow, if you listen to him, then I'll help you defeat your enemies and defeat your adversaries. Now, sure enough, as we all know, the people sin with the sin of the golden calf in the beginning of chapter 32. And because this covenant was very strict, God tells Moshe, Lech red ki shechet amcha. They're all similar to the story of the flood that he took out of Egypt. And God says, and God reaches his conclusion, Ra'iti et amazek hinem ksharafu. God reached the conclusion the nation is stiff-necked, meaning they're stubborn, they don't change their ways. It's not working. And therefore, God is sort of begging Moshe to pray, says, now allow me to kindle my anger against them, and I'll eat them up. I'll consume them. And I'll make a nation out of you or people like you. And then the famous prayer of Moshe. Again, we're all familiar with these psukim, so therefore, I'm just going into them briefly. Now, I want to look at Moshe's argument. Again, Moshe's sort of complaining. I'm using this theme of complaints at Har Sinai, but I want to argue that this complaint is a type of prayer. Now, Vaycha Moshe. Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Yeah, sure.
When I read this and when I read your interpretation, I'm struck by the fact that the people really never change. I mean, your description, we sin, we get better, we sin. That's still the same story in Sefer Shoftim. Nothing changes.
So in a nutshell, I'll take your question and use it for the next part of the share. It goes sort of like Dora's question from before. Instead of asking, why is God being so mean? Ask a better question. Why did he make man so frail? And why did God make man with the ability to do such evil and not be committed? But again, that's the reality. That's the way man is. And Chumash is a book that we study to take that challenge and channel it. Now, what I want to claim is that there's a big difference in training people where either with Midat Din, either you make it or you don't, or Midat Rachamim when I can learn from my mistakes. Now, Midat Rachamim is helpful when I'm dealing with people who tend to make mistakes, or bound to make mistakes, or prone to make mistakes, but you can learn from your mistakes. I call that adolescence. And some people never grow up from that. But it part of growing up as a child, remember the whole thing of Tov and Rod doesn't begin to kids age 2 or 3. And when they start growing up and they start learning how to lie and what they get away with, listening, not listening. A child, a human being, when they grow up, little by little, they grow, and little by little, with good guidance, they can learn from their mistakes and become better people, even greater people. But it's a slow process that, just like humans go through them, the nation can go through them. But when I'm reading the story of Am Yisrael coming out of Egypt, again, it's understandable that they don't live up to God's expectations. And that's what it says in Shemot. Again, Sefer Shemot understands why they weren't able to, because they suffered so much. But what did we learn from that? So we who maybe didn't suffer so much, maybe we don't have the same excuse. But how can we learn from their mistakes? How can we learn from our mistakes and not miss opportunities and appreciate that God's willingness to accept our weaknesses if we can learn from them and grow from them? So now, what's Moshe argue? Moshe is going to argue thematically. Beimer, why should God get angry? Kindle his anger against his people that you took out of Egypt, okay, with your great arm. Now, Moshe is basing his argument on 2 things. One on a thematic argument and one on a legal technical argument. What's the thematic argument? Ever since we've been studying Chumash, we've been pointing out this theme of God's reputation. The core covenant at Har Sinai is a nation representing God. As we say in Elena, which is the introduction to Malchiot, it's our duty to praise God by how we talk and how we behave. Okay? And that's why we're different than the other nations. That's Aleinu the Shabbat. And that's why we're different than the other nations. But our hope is that through our behavior and through our keeping the mitzvot, we'll have an impact on the rest of humankind. To turn evil, that people can learn from us how to learn from their mistakes and try to do good and not evil. Now, that's a tremendous challenge. But if the whole point of our history and God's relationship with us is for the sake of other nations, to sanctify God, what will happen if God punishes us? Their whole belief in God will be lost. Okay? What conclusion might the people in Egypt think? Oh, he took us out of Egypt just to kill them. Remember, that was Moshe's turning our complaints, the people's complaints, to argue with God not to punish us. Why? Just like your own people were thinking, you brought us out here to kill us, destroy us in the desert. Remember, Egypt will say the same thing. That's what we're saying. Egypt will say it. And therefore, you'll look bad because you'll look like you're a weak God. Or your glory will go down in the eyes of the nation. And therefore, hold back from your anger, right? And give your people another chance. Now, and then that's the thematic prayer or argument. Again, based on our own complaints, we're going to sort of transpose those complaints to what Egypt might say and give a thematic argument with God why he shouldn't kindle his entire anger with us and wipe us out like he suggested. Now there's a technical argument. Remember the covenant you made with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that what? You're going to give them the land and make us numerous like the stars of the heaven, and this land I'm going to give you to inherit. Now, in theory, as long as God leaves Moshe alive, or people like Moshe, a small amount of people alive, who can keep to the covenant, he's I can get out of this technicality, and therefore when Moshe argues, we'll say, otherwise take me out of the book. But here's another argument. You promised us the land of Israel. You promised that to our ancestors. But not only do you promise to give us the land, but also we would be like Kochvei HaShamayim. If you kill so many of us, we won't be numerous like the stars of heaven. And therefore, he's taking those from a more of a legal approach. He's giving a legal argument. Remember Brit Avot, and remember the theme of sanctifying God's name. And sure enough, God answers that prayer. Now, why is thematic prayer so important? In addition to the legal side of it, because if Moshe shows God that we understand why we're chosen, we understand the theme of sanctifying God's name, then there's hope for recovery. If we understand why we're chosen, then there's a chance we can learn from our mistakes and fix things. If you don't understand the purpose of your chosenness, it'll be hard to do proper tshuva. But if I have workers who understand the goal of the company, but make mistakes, but they identify with that goal, then there's logic in giving them another chance, even though they did a bad job in the beginning. They can learn from their mistakes and grow. And therefore, we know the story. We punished the 3,000 troublemakers who perpetrated the sin, but the rest of the people were still in trouble. And then the next day, after the 3,000 are killed, okay, Moshe tells the people, Atem chatatem chata gdola, you did a terrible sin. Listen carefully now. Vata elel Hashem, God, Moshe tells the people, he's going to go up and try, but he said what we like to say is atonement. Ulai achapra bat chatchatchem. Okay, Moshe is going to try and argue with God. Maybe we will get kapara. Now, what I want to claim, that's a whole different share. I don't see kapara as atonement or forgiveness, but rather protection from punishment. In other words, God, you deserve to be punished. I need protection from that punishment to enable God to give us another chance to do tshuva. Kapara itself is not. Kapara can hold back punishment to enable time to do tshuva. So therefore, if you're in a relationship with God where you should be punished, I need kapara to protect you. And that was the thing we talked about on Yom Kippur. If we're not worthy to go to Kodesh Kodeshim, when you go in, you should be killed, and therefore you need kapara. You need to do some act of protection to show God that you need protection from that encounter. Now Moshe continues and says, "Im tisach hatatam." Moshe says the people sinned a terrible sin. Now, if you carry away their sin, that's fine, and if you don't, wipe me out of the book. The way I understand it is that if God told Moshe Rabbeinu, this is again Moshe is giving a legal argument and saying, if you think you can keep Brit Avot going through me, remember, let me make you a great nation. Moshe says, I'm not going to be that. I'm not going to do that for you. And therefore, from a technical point of view, Moshe is saying, you're committed to Brit Avot, to the covenant with your ancestors. And but we saw in Sefer Bereshit to give them the land to make them a nation. And therefore, you can't keep that covenant through me because I'm not willing to be part of that book or part of that story. Okay. And then God answers a very strange answer. God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, Mi asher chatad li emchena misifri. So God tells Moshe, don't tell me who we can forgive and not to forgive. But I want to focus on God's answer here. Vata lech nechetam, go lead the people. El asher dibarti lach. Now lead them. Okay, I'll take you to Israel. I'll fulfill Brit Avot. And I'll send a malach. We'll see, this is a different malach, or lower level malach. And I'll punish you when I punish you. Basically, no longer immediate punishment, but delayed punishment. I call this like the first credit card, where you still owe money, but you have to pay over installments. That's what Chazal say. Every generation pays a little bit, one installment from Chetei Egel. Now, what God basically tells Moshe Rabbeinu, and this is the middle stage of chapter 33, which we don't read on a fast day, but this stage in the middle is the important background to understand Moshe's argument in prayer later on. God tells Moshe, what's God's solution? Brit Sinai is broken because we're an Am Kshei Oref, because we're stubborn people. There's no way we can live up to this relationship built on midat adin, on attributes of judgment, of being strict, and therefore but He is committed to Brit Sinai, and therefore I'm going to show you that God's first solution is going to be, I'll fulfill Brit Avot without Brit Sinai, meaning I'll give you the land of Israel, I'll help you conquer it, but you won't be a nation representing God. You'll be a goy gadol, but not a goy kadosh. If I use those, you'll be a nation, you can become a great nation in the land, you can have your land of Israel, but you won't be able to represent me, or basically, you won't have Sefer Vayikra, you won't have Kedusha. Therefore, God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, you want to fulfill Brit Avot, you could have Brit Avot, go to the land which I promised Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, I'll send a malach to help you conquer it. But God's saying, I'm not going to come with you. Remember this phrase, because you're an Am Kshei Oref. You're a stubborn nation. There's no way I can identify myself with this nation. I made a promise. I'll keep my promise. I'll give you the land, but I can't allow you to represent me because your behavior is so bad. Therefore, again, I'm not going to go in. I'm not going to come with you. My Shekhinah won't be with you because you're a stubborn nation. I can't allow you to represent me. And if I am with you, I'll have to punish you every single time, and you won't survive with it. Okay? Moshe, and therefore Moshe took his tent outside. Now let me show you this idea, how Yeshua articulates everything I just told you. Let me stop the share here for a minute. I should have put it on the source sheet, but I didn't. In Yeshua chapter 24, which is where Yeshua attempts to, I guess this is it should be there we go. We don't want Yeshua, we want, Sefer Yeshua. It's the last chapter of Yeshua, even though chronologically it might be a little bit earlier in that time period. In the last chapter, Yeshua gives a whole speech that we quote at our Seder. Now, how God Terach was living in a world of idol worship. You pick Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. We went down to Egypt, and you took us out of Egypt, and you helped us defeat our enemies. And therefore, he says, basically, Yoshua summarizes all Jewish history up until his time period. And now you have a land, you conquered it, and you have your own cities. You don't really got any more for food and protection. You're all set. Now that we're out of the desert and we're settled on the land, now Yoshua wants to reestablish Brit Sinai. Vata, Yiruat Hashem. Notice Yoshua tells me, I want you to fear God. Again, stage 1, Reshit Chochma Yiruat Hashem. Vivdu oto b'tamim u'v'emet, serve him with truth and sincerity, and get rid of your idol worship that you might have collected in your conquest of Israel. You just conquered the land, you might have taken idol worship, things you shouldn't have. You might have bad influences. Get rid of it. Right? And then he gives him this choice. Im Menachem, if you don't want to serve God, make a choice today, who you want to work for. Do you want to serve your ancestral gods from Terach? Do you want to serve the local gods of Canaan? Or do you want to serve the historical God who took you out of Egypt? Moshe Yeshua is giving at least a theoretical choice. Decide who want to give your allegiance to. The God who took you out of Egypt, who did these miracles, who has a goal for you to be a Goy Kadosh? Or do you want to follow your ancestral gods, from your family gods from Terach, or your local gods, the gods of Canaan? You captured the land, but those gods are still in charge. 3 different tfisot, 3 different ideas of worshiping God. So the people answer right away, and they say, Chalila lanu, we're not going to leave God to serve other gods, because Hashem, our God, Hashem Elokeinu, like in Devarim, he took us out of Egypt, he did all these miracles, etc. He gives a whole big speech why they accept. Now, Yeshua should say, okay, that's great. Listen what Yeshua says now. Remember Yeshua Lam. Lo tuchlu lavodat Hashem kilim k'toshimu. You won't be able to serve God, because why? He's a zealous God. Okay? Lo yisal shechem. He won't forgive your sins. If you're representing God, you're serving God, he has to be strict. Yeshua's reminding them of the 10 Commandments, at least the first luchot. And if you leave God, what will happen? And serve other gods, who have to punish you. So we're saying, if you accept Brit Sinai, you won't be able to live up to it. Okay? And the people tell Yeshua, no, we're going to take that challenge. But Yeshua wants to make sure that people are aware of the importance and the severity of the likelihood of their possible punishment should they not do a good job representing God. So Yeshua tells the people, you're a witness today that God chose you to serve him, and then the people get rid of their idol worship, and they say they're good all final nasa v'nishma, Yeshua et Hashem Eloheinu navod v'v'kolo nishma v'navod. And then Yeshua makes a brit with the people, and they have Chok Mishpat and Shechem. It's like Avram began his journey first with Shechem, and continued from there to Beitel, etc. Yeshua writes these things down, and we reestablish our brit with God in the city of Shechem. After Yeshua clarifies to make sure they realize what responsibility they're going into. Again, I just brought this speaking from Yeshua to emphasize that idea of going from Brit Avot to Brit Sinai. You conquered the land. Brit Sinai means you're representing God. It's going to be much, much more strict. So let's pick up now back to our regular source sheet. And now we see Moshe's argument. God told Moshe Rabbeinu, you can have the land, but I'm not going with you. Again, Goy Gadol, but not Goy Kadosh. Moshe tells God, V'yomer Moshe Hashem, Re'eh. That means sort of understand. You're telling me to lead them to Israel, right? And then he goes, but you told me I'm not coming. You're not coming, but you want me to lead them. Moshe gives this whole argument. He wants to understand what's going to be, but his bottom line is, Ure'eh ki amcha goy hazeh. I want you to understand. He tells God, understand that they're your people. And therefore, they can't just be a Goy Gadol. They have to be a Goy Kadosh if we're fulfilling your brit. God tells Moshe, I'll go with you and not with them. And Moshe argues, if you don't come with all of us, we're not leaving Har Sinai. Okay? And how will we know that what? That I found favor in your eye. I found favor and your nation found favor. You have to come with us, not just with me, but with all of us. And then I, together with my people, will be able to represent you for all the nations of the earth. So Moshe argues, again, thematically, what's the point in God coming just with Moshe, come with the whole nation, because we're a nation representing God. Now we're sort of in this catch-22, where if God comes with us and dwells with us, he'll have to punish us as soon as we make a mistake. If he doesn't come with it, there's no point in being a goy gadol without being a goy kadosh. And therefore, we need to change the covenant. The laws and principles will be the same, but the attributes are going to change. And therefore, God tells Moshe, I agree to your prayer. He answers that prayer. And then Moshe asks to see how God's glory will manifest itself. And then the famous line where God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, God tells Moshe we have to have a new ceremony, leading to a new covenant in Har Sinai. I'll call out my name, announce my new attributes. And then the big line, remember, God now is going to change his attributes. Instead of an El Kana, it'll be an El Chanun V'Rachum. No, it's because of Moshe's prayer and argument. Moshe's arguing logically and thematically with God. That argument, which I say is the beginning of prayer or the logic of prayer, and if God sees that that prayer is sincere and led by the leaders of the people, and hopefully Moshe can teach this to his people, then God is willing to change the covenant. Therefore, God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, carve 2 new tablets, remember? And we'll write on them the same things. Remember, the written word is the same as the first tablets, as Moshe does, and no one can come up with it on the mountain. And then we have the famous Midot Rachamim. I'm just summarizing the shir we did way back. If you look at the left column, these were all the Midot of Din. Hashem was El Kana. He was a zealous God beforehand. And now he is now he's going to be El Rachum V'Chanun. Before he was Pokei Avon, only the Sonai. And now he's going to be Pokei Avon at the end. He's going to put off punishment up to 4 generations. And then God is Chesed beforehand. Chesed was only to Avai, and now God is Rav Chesed and Noser Chesed. Notice he gives an abundance of Chesed, even for those who don't deserve right away. It'll be balanced with truth. Basically, all of God's midot are going to go from Din to Rachamim. Before God said, Lo Yinakeh, now God said, Venakeh, Lo Yinakeh. And before God said, I won't take away your sins. And now God says, He'll Nosei Avon V'Fesha. So basically, all the attributes of Din in the story of the first Luchot, after God announces his new attributes. With the second Luchot, now God can forgive. Now, as we all know, the written word is in the Luchot, even in the second Luchot, but as God gives Moshe Rabbeinu the second Luchot, he announces, even though it should be strict, I can be forgiving. Now, knowing God can forgive opens up the whole new relationship of Midat Rachamim and learning from your mistakes. And therefore, now that God declared these midot, Moshe quickly comes, he bows down, and now his famous prayer, V'yomer, Im na matzatechem beinecha Hashem, hilechna Hashem b'kirbeinu. Now he wants God to come in our midst, right? And here the word key has to mean even though we're an Amkshe Oref, even though we're stubborn people. And a stubborn people, as God said before, remember, God said beforehand, here, Ki lo ala b'kirbecha. Yeah, God said, I'm not going to go with you because you're an Amkshe Oref, therefore, Brit Sinai is gone. Moshe argued, and God's willing to give him another chance. And now that God declared his new attributes, now Moshe is asking God now come with us. Now come in our midst, even though we're an Amkshe Oref, and forgive us for our sins. And God says, I'm going to establish this Brit with you. And what Brit that is, that's a whole long story. But again, I talked about the parallel beforehand. Come with us. Now, even though we're Amkshe Oref, in contrast to beforehand, because I'm not coming with you, even though because you're an Amkshe Oref, now even though, come with us anyhow. And if I follow Chazal, God's answer is going to be, I can forgive you, but you're not forgiven yet. God's Shekhinah doesn't return for another 6 months. Remember, God declares at Yom Kippur his new attributes of mercy, that he can forgive. But God's Shekhinah doesn't return until Rosh Chodesh Nisan, 6 months later after they build the Mishkan. In other words, God has to give them a project called the Mishkan, a rehab project, to show God we can learn from our mistakes. And we can show God, what I like to say, it's not the nation doesn't build a Mishkan, the Mishkan builds a nation. So the culmination of Sefer Shemot, I'm just following the Ramban's explanation of Sefer Shemot, where the level of the Am Yisrael returns to the level of our ancestors, and we've fixed our covenant, and now we have a covenant and a symbol of God in our midst, God Shochem B'tochenu, because we built a house for him. That only happens after we prove to God we're able to follow instructions and we can work together as a nation and build that Mishkan together. And therefore, even though Moshe asks, Yelech Hashem b'kirbeinu, come in our midst, even though we're Am She'orev, God didn't say, yes, I'm dwelling with you right away. God doesn't return to dwell with them until they build the Mishkan, and then the Shekhinah at the end of Sefer Shemot dwells on the Mishkan. I'll just show you that in a second. Just real quickly in Chumash, just 2 lines real fast. In Sefer Shemot, there we are. When Moshe went up in chapter 24 to get the first luchot, as we all remember, Moshe goes up the mountain. Vaychas Hanan et Tahar, and Kvod Hashem was in Har Sinai, and then Moshe's up there for 40 days and 40 nights. He comes down, they break the luchot, God Shekhinah goes away. At the end of Sefer Shemot, after we do that 6 months of everything's kasher tziva Hashem et Moshe, over and over again, everything's kasher tziva Hashem et Moshe. In other words, we show God we can follow rules, kasher tziva Hashem et Moshe. And then finally, how's it end? Vaychas Hanan et Moed, Kvod Hashem melei et Mishkan. So it works. In other words, the Hanan covers the Moed, and Kvod Hashem is on the Mishkan. How the rest of the book ends, that's not important for now. Also, I want to show you is that now we have a whole new relationship with God, and just I think to sort of solve the problem of fear, our whole relationship, the whole covenant with God, changes with Midat Rachamim. And as God now is willing to be more forgiving with us, God didn't say, will forgive. He says, I can forgive. Knowing He can't forgive opens up a whole road of tshuva. And but Chazal says, if we as a people are forgiving people, if we can learn from our mistakes and forgive others for their mistakes and act accordingly, that gives God a reason not to take His Shekhinah away and to be with us and help us. And that's why it's so central in our prayer, that idea of complaining, and the idea of help us for the sake of your name. Remember what we say in Tachnun. Help us as Reinu Elishen for the sake of your glory, and atone our sins, and for the sake of your name, for the sake of your greatness. It's all based on the logic of Moshe's argument in prayer in Har Sinai. Now, the reason I brought that is I brought an example from Sefer Tehillim, how we can learn from our mistakes, and how now that led to Moshe's prayer, God answering Moshe's prayer of giving us a whole new relationship. And if I'm studying Mamad Har Sinai, you can't appreciate Mamad Har Sinai if you don't read the whole story. I can't end with Parsha Yitro. Even with Parshat Mishpatim, I need to end with Kitisa, and actually with even Vaikal Pekude, the whole second half of Sefer Shemot. And that's why I bring that out, because we're doing the series now is on the second half of Sefer Shemot. And as we celebrate Shavuot, remembering Zman Matan Toratenu, it's important to remember the greatness of Mamad Har Sinai, to understand, appreciate why it failed for the first generation, but to understand how God introducing His Midat Rachamim with the second Luchot enables that brit to be eternal. Okay, I'll stop here real quick. Any questions? Nothing in the chat? Okay, I guess nothing. Okay, nothing in the chat, so I'll just finish up real fast. I have a family bat mitzvah coming up tonight, so I have to leave a minute or two early. But let me go back and finish the source sheet. Where are we? Okay, just I wanted to end the share with just a review for the laning for Shavuos morning, based on what we learned. So we talked about this last week a little bit. It was the 3rd month. Remember, we arrive at Har Sinai. Moshe goes up, and we make that proposition. I just put this on the source sheet again, so you can use it for studying in preparation for laning on the first day of Shavuot. We have the famous proposition: do you want to be a nation? Do you want to become a nation? Mamlechet Koni v'Goy Kadosh, a nation separated to serve God, to represent Him. We agree. And then the whole question is, how close are we going to be to God? And then I'll just summarize the key point here. Now that God has to announce what are called the 10 statements of Aseret HaDvarim, the question is, how close will Am Yisrael be when God speaks to them? Now, up until now, they've heard everything through Moshe Rabbeinu. They're trusting Moshe Rabbeinu that he's representing God. But the question is, at Har Sinai, will they actually hear God speak? So God tells Moshe his first plan. I'm going to come to you. I'm going to speak to Moshe in the thickness of a cloud, so the people will overhear me speaking to you. And then they'll trust in you, that what you say in God's name is truly from God. And then there's something missing in the text. And Moshe told the people what the people said, but was missing what the people said. And Chazal learned from here, the people must have asked They don't want to hear a buffered encounter with God, uh, buffered by a cloud. They want a direct relationship. And therefore, God tells Moshe, tell the people, if you want a direct relationship, get ready for 3 days, stay tomorrow and the next day, clean your clothes, be ready for day 3. Because on day 3, God's going to come to the eyes of all the people. We call that, the first plan was plan A, a buffered encounter, plan B, the direct encounter. And we're ready now for revelation. We prepare for revelation for 3 days, and everything gets ready. And then on the 3rd day, what happens? Everything's shaking. God's about to appear in front of all of them, and then the people get scared again. And we talked about this tension between the need for fear and there was too much fear, and they chickened out. Therefore, Moshe had to bring them back to the mountain after all the fear. They ran back. They come back again, and then the Hitgalut is about to happen. Har Sinai is full of smoke. God came down on fire. Everything's shaking, and then we have the long shofar blowing. And God's about to speak the Dibrot. And instead of God speaking the Dibrot, we're told Moshe speaks, and God answered Moshe's voice. So amplified, as Rashi says, very difficult psukim. But the way Chazal understand this is that Moshe spoke the last 8. That was Rashi on the spot. And God spoke the first 2. And we learn that from the 10 Commandments being in first person, the first 2, and the switch to third person from 3 to 10. Now, the story that makes everything the most confusing is over here. Again, when this limitation happened, Psukim Chaf to Chafei, the question is, this happened during the Dibrot, before the Dibrot, after the Dibrot? All the Parshim have but I want to point out the fear element, no matter when it happened. God comes down on Har Sinai to the top of the mountain, and he called by Kram Moshe, he calls on Moshe and tells Moshe to come up. Notice, first God was on the entire mountain. Now God limits himself to the top of the mountain. Summons Moshe up to the top of the mountain, where he's going to appear. God tells Moshe, go down and warn the people. Now they can't get too close. One final warning, you can't get too close to God. And even the Kohanim become closer to God, they have to be careful because they might also be punished, as happens later with the story of Nadav and Avihu. And Moshe argues, don't worry, they'll be fine. And God tells him, go warn them anyhow. God tells Moshe, go down, only come up with Aaron, and the Kohanim and the Am can't come up too close to God because they'll get punished. Moshe goes down and warns them. And then when God speaks the 10 Commandments, it's totally unclear whether how close the people were standing on Har Sinai, how directly did they hear from God. So again, the famous interpretation of Chazal is the first 2 they heard directly from God, and the last 8 they heard through Moshe Rabbeinu. And the fair story that we spent so much time on took place between Commandment 2 and 3, right over here. And the fair story, I'm just going to summarize it again, because that's exactly the dialectic that we've been talking about the whole time. Remember, the people see all the loud noises and the loud shofar blowing. Remember, we talked about this last week when the exact opposite happened with Elio and Har Carmel when things went wrong. But the people get all scared, they stand in the distance. And then the most difficult, confusing psukim, when the people tell Moshe Rabbeinu, we want you to speak to us, we want to hear from God because we're going to die. What does Moshe tell them to do? Remember, Moshe tells the people, don't be afraid. It means, we said Yirah was good. So, don't be afraid because God's testing you, and that's why he's coming so close, in order that you fear him all the time, so you don't sin. So we see from here, fear is good. You need to have fear of God. But that fear can't cause you to be too far away. So that dialectic, which is basically the whole point of the first 2 classes in the series, was exactly these closing lines of Mamad Har Sinai, where the people finally stand in a distance. How far away? Again, unclear. Did Moshe ask them to come back closer and the people, no, stayed far away? Or the people wanted to go farther away and Moshe said, stay where you are, don't go any farther away? Again, if you want to have fun Shemot night, just study these psukim and look at the commentators. But bottom line, the people stand in a distance. Moshe goes up by himself into the cloud where God is. And then, does he hear the last 8? Does he hear all 10? Ramban says this all happened before Mamad Har Sinai. Chazal say it happened between 2 and 3, and Ibn Ezra keeps it where it is. They have all 3 opinions, and it's clear that Chumash is intentionally unclear, because the lack of clarity in the story is exactly sort of the beauty of the what's called the obfuscation of what happened. Because on the one hand, you need to have that fear to begin that relationship, but you can't let that fear, the danger of fear itself, is that it will lead you to be too far away from God. Finding, not getting too close, not being too far. That's called the derech emtza. I think is reflected in the story where the people tell Moshe Rabbeinu, we don't want to be too close. And Moshe says, don't be afraid and don't go too far away. And the people stand at a distance where again, they're not too far, they're not too close. And that dialectic is an eternal one. There's dangers being too close to God, danger being too far away from God. Everyone has to find their own level to make sure they sort of don't burn out. And they can grow. And I think you grow from learning from your mistakes and getting as close as you can without getting burnt. Okay, I'll stop here for I'll just take any questions. Quick, wait a second. Oh, Larry asked a question. Yeah. So Larry is summarizing what we're trying to say. Hashem can forgive. That we can forgive. We have to show God we're worthy of forgiveness. Um, and the okay, what happened in Dvarim is a little bit different, and that's a giant argument. If you want to have fun Shavuos night, read the Ibn Ezra and the Ramban on what the story in Dvarim, the first story in chapter 5 in Dvarim after the Ten Commandments, is the same as what we just read in Parsha Yitro after the Ten Commandments. It's to summarize, Ibn Ezra claims it's the same story and has to explain the slight little differences and why it's really the same. And and um, and then what happened? And then Ramban argues it has to be two different stories, and that's why he moves the story in Shemot to before the Ten Commandments and the story in Devarim to afterwards. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So I want to wish everyone a Chag. Maybe we have Shosh Chag Be'Hagbalah this week coming up. And again, knowing God can forgive, we have to be worthy of it. I think that's one of the key points of prayer. I hope you understood that point that remember the word plilim or tefillah is based on sort of arguing or stating your case in front of God. And again, it's not arguing God's wrong, I'm right. It's arguing, trying to explain to God why it's in God's interest to forgive us or give us another chance. But if that prayer or argument comes with sincerity, so it's the sincerity that God sees in our prayers that gives God a reason to answer those prayers. And I think that's exactly what Chazal say about Yom Kippur davening, tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, mavrin Torah gzera. It's not just you start with tefillah, but together with doing tzedakah and doing tshuva, all those together, knowing that God can forgive, but it's a function of our commitment and sincerity. So that understanding leads to learning from mistakes and growing in your relationship with God, which is, I think, the eternal message of Har Sinai. Okay, one other thing in the chat, real fast. We had that one we did. Okay, good. Okay, so I wish everybody and next week again. There's a Jewish holiday, I think, on Sunday. No, actually, next week there's going to be a Yom Yun on Sunday. My mistake. We won't have a regular class on Sunday. My class next week will be Mitzvah Shabbat actually, at I think 11:15 Mitzvah Shabbat. There'll be a mini series. Rabbi J will talk about it. There's going to be, if Rabbi J was here, we'd announce that now. A Shavuos night, there'll be 3 half-hour shiurim, 3 speakers, Mitzvah Shabbat, I think from 10:15 to 11:30, I think it starts around 10 p.m. on Mitzvah Shabbat. And then Sunday morning, there'll be another 3 classes. It's to be Yotzei Erev Pesach.
Erev
So there'll be
Shavuot.
Erev Shavuot, yeah, my mistake. Erev Shavuot, so I'm sure you'll give a lot of announcements about it, but that's the plan for this coming week. So, but that share next week will be about Shavuot, not about Mamad Har Sinai. This was on Mamad Har Sinai. Again, after this, we're going to finish up Sefer Shemot, a couple things about the Mishkan and the theme of Shemot, but the main thing I wanted to do for this part of the series on Shemot, on one book and one theme, was how to prepare to appreciate the Mamad Har Sinai side of Shavuot in light of Sefer Shemot. Okay, so everyone have a good week and daven for as we see, unfortunate week, daven for better news, and we should turn this into a somehow to solve the difficult situation we're in. We should be worthy of it. Okay, I'll close this. I have to close the end of recording, and we'll stop here.